Okay, it is 2:02. I'm going to stand by my word and I'm going to go ahead and kick things off if that's okay with you guys. So, hello. Thank you so much for being here. Today is our fourth virtual session for our summer of mental health information sessions, and we are super excited for everybody to join us today. Laura is I'm so sorry. I just let two other people in. I'm so sorry. Okay. Our speaker for today is Laura Banks. Laura is a certified compassion cultivation trainer instructor. She is dual certified by the Compassion Institute and Stanford University Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. While raising a family around the world, she has witnessed how meeting the challenges of life with compassion can greatly reduce suffering and transform the very things that people thought would break them into the most resilient and beautiful parts of who they are. This powerful combination of training and personal experience shape Laura's commitment to strengthen her own and others' capacity to thrive, especially through the cultivation of compassion. Laura will provide information and advice for moving forward with compassion. Compassion training can reduce stress, anxiety, and depression and enhance our connection with others. It builds our capacity to engage with our own and others' difficult experiences from a place of understanding. This interactive workshop will explore how compassion can help us move forward with courage as individuals, families, colleagues, and communities. I'll ask that everyone keeps themselves muted while Laura leads this session. Feel free to drop questions into the chat box. I will be moderating the chat as well as taking down any questions for potential Q&A afterwards. We will try to answer as many questions as we can if there's time left over. We'll be recording this session as well, so if you have to leave early, you can always watch it later. Enough from me, though. I would like to officially pass the mic over to Laura so that she can begin her session.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And thanks to all of you guys for being here. I am just so honored and delighted when Isaac reached out to me. I was really excited. I love libraries. I have such fond memories of growing up, going to the library, from as long as I can remember, reading programs and plays that the library put on and activities. And it was just a central part of the fabric of my family's life. And in fact, it was my first paid part-time job when I was in high school. I was a library page in a children's library in South Orange, New Jersey. So I just am so grateful for libraries in my life and the life of my children as I've raised them. They're now young adults. So just thank you to each of you guys. If you're here, it means that you are somehow involved in the work of a library, and it looks really different now than it has any time in history, but especially in the last 18 months. You guys have each figured out how to take what libraries are within the community of the United States and to really translate and to figure out new ways of being the heart of the community and of meeting the needs of your constituents and of your communities during this pandemic. Where I live here in Ashburn, Virginia, in Loudoun County, I have been amazed at the creative ways in which, when the library had to be shut down, it still made its resources available to people, how they were able to get programming online, and how they navigated opening back up, and now they're navigating being remasked. And this is a really difficult and an interesting time. And I know that it's landed in each of your own lives in ways both personally and professionally that have been really challenging. And so I just want to name that and honor that and thank you. Thank you for being where you're at, doing what you're doing. So I'm going to give you just a little kind of map of where we're going to go in this next hour or so together, so that you have a sense of a little bit of who I am, a little bit of where we'll be. I know that that's helpful for me when people are starting out. Isaac gave a great introduction, so thank you. As he said, my name is Laura Banks, and I have had the privilege of really working and teaching with these practices around compassion actively for almost the last 4 years, since I did the teacher training at Stanford. And so one of the things that has been really tremendous about the pandemic, sort of those silver linings that I didn't expect, is I taught everything in person. Like all the classes and workshops I did up until March 2020 were in person. And then nothing's happening in person. Like that's what love looked like. Love looked like not getting together in person. And so I shifted to Zoom and to being online, like many of us did. And it felt sort of like the end of like, I didn't really know if this work was going to translate online, but it has, and it has in really powerful ways. And I've been able to connect, and my colleagues and other people have been able to connect and share information in much broader communities than we would have been able to if we hadn't really learned or had to sort of been required to lean into this technology. And so that's one of the things that I'll sort of keep pointing to in this time together, which is that our capacity, life is hard, right? It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it's just also really hard. Nobody signed up for the pandemic. Nobody, like at the beginning of 2020, was like, hey, I'm going to do a pandemic this year, the next 2 years, the next whatever. We don't know. And for many of us, there have been things in our lives that came before. Maybe we've had illness, maybe we've had the death of a loved one, maybe we've had a job loss, maybe we've had children who've had really difficult struggles that we weren't able to figure out. Maybe we've struggled with addiction, or, there's like, being a human being is this combination of really wonderful love and also really, really hard. And what is powerful about the practice of compassion is that it really is this ability, it's this capacity that's an innate capacity. We have this as human beings. Like the research, what they're doing more progressively, more and more research around what is compassion, what does it look like in the body, what's the physiology of compassion. And the more they do, the more they realize, oh, this is what we are wired for. As human beings, we are wired to do hard things, and we are also wired to do hard things with love. And that's a capacity we have, but like all capacities, it's also something that we can train and we can develop, and we can, once we understand it, deliberately lean into. And so in today's workshop, I'm going to just give you a tiny little taste of sort of the research and the understanding of what compassion is. So, and just so that we have a common definition, the word compassion can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I'll give a little definition. We'll do an exercise where you get to just reflect on some experiences. I'll give you a little bit of time for journaling because this is a larger group. We're not going to do breakout rooms. So sort of the interactive pieces will be mostly just sitting and reflecting and taking a few minutes to journal and write down your thoughts. I'd encourage you to have a conversation about it with your partner or a friend or a colleague afterwards, because talking with other people, whether it's on phone, in person, or on Zoom, really, like, that connection kind of cements what we've learned, and also it helps us have those moments of connection. So we'll have a little bit of time just to reflect and to journal. And then I'll give some sort of just stories and a poem or two and some ways to think about, like, how do I apply this? What might this look like in my personal life and in my professional life as a librarian moving forward? So that's kind of the overview. I have a few PowerPoint slides because I know that for some people who are visual learners, just having something to kind of anchor your eyes on is helpful. I won't do those a lot, but I will pop them in here and there. And I will, just so that you know this ahead of time, I will send Isaac, who is coordinating this, a list of resources and also quotes or any poems that I use, so that you have access to those, but also books and articles that you can go to after this if you want to learn more. And I will also send the PowerPoint slide as a PDF. So you can definitely take screenshots, you can definitely take notes. But I also just want to say that because for some people, like, it helps them be like, oh, I don't need to write every single thing down, just so that you know that those things will be there. So I'm going to begin just by sharing my screen. And sort of we'll just start here with the definition. So, here's the required welcome PowerPoint title slide. We're moving forward with compassion. But this next slide is the definition of compassion that is really coming out of the science and coming out of the research around compassion. And it's grounded in the physiology of us as human beings. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But compassion, as our body experiences it, is an awareness of suffering, like an awareness that, wow, this is something is hard right now, that then is coupled with a willingness to do something to relieve that suffering. So it's not just noticing it, it's actually that sense of oomph, what am I going to do? And those two things together, that awareness and that willingness to do something, that's the magic. It's those two things, not just being aware of it and not just wanting to like do whatever we can, but to be able to hold both things. Because the awareness of difficulty or of suffering isn't just noticing there's a problem, it's noticing what's really needed, right? Like, I'm not going to just bulldoze in and do what I think needs to be done. But what's the real problem here? Like, how can I be present with this? How can I pay attention in a way that I'm noticing what's really going on here, right? And how can I respond to what's really needed because I care about this? What the way that when I was doing our teacher training, Kelly McGonigal, who's pretty well known she's written a couple of books, but she taught the science section of our teacher training, and she sort of broke it down into these components, right? So there's this awareness of suffering, and then like that willingness to do something. Both of those things come online in our bodies as a human being. But she breaks it down into these 6 pieces. One is that there's an awareness and a recognition of suffering or difficulty. This is hard. Like, what's happening, like for example, the pandemic, this is really hard. And it's landing in each of our lives in unique ways. But we can know, if you see another human being alive right now, they've lived through a pandemic. They might feel differently about it. They might have a different opinion about what the next steps are about it. They might feel differently about what the role of whatever is in it than you do, but their life has been affected. There's not one person, from the newest born baby to the oldest person living, who you will meet in the next month, probably for the next several years, or even across the course of your life. You can know that any human being that was born in 2022 or earlier, their lives are directly affected by the pandemic in some way. So that's an awareness, right? The second is this feeling of concern and connection. Like, this matters to me. Like, this, there's something about that person, there's something about the situation that taps into my sense of care. And from those two things together, like if you think about when you've had a pet or a child or a partner or a friend or a parent who you really care about and they're struggling, your instinct is like, what can I do to help, right? That's a natural thing. When we see suffering and when we care, as human beings, we have what's called an amygdala, which is the part of our brain that tells us like, okay, problem here, problem here, problem here. It's our sort of a stress response. So when we see suffering, that's like, wah, 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 fire alarms. But when we are feeling compassion, when we're able to tap into that sense of care, another really deep part of our brain goes online, and it's the mammalian caretaking mama bear, like tenderness part of our brain comes online. And when that comes online, our amygdala is still saying there's a problem, but then there's this part of us which fills us with care, fills us with concern, fills us with love, with a willingness. And from that, naturally, the part of our brain that gets us ready to take action, the parts of our brain that make us see more widely, like literally our vision goes poof, we see more resources, we're able to take action. Those processes also start coming online. So we feel this desire to do something, and we believe there is something we can do. Sometimes we can't fix a problem, but that's not what compassion is always about. Sometimes things can't be fixed, but we can still show up. We can still care. We can still ask, how are you? We can still try to do what we can for ourselves or for someone else. So it's a belief that we can make a difference. And from that stems this, like the next, like it's this natural unfolding, is there's a willingness to respond or to take action. There's a willingness to figure out, how do we, get books to patrons when we have to close the library? How do we stay safe? How do we keep our colleagues safe when people are coming back, right? Like, there's a willingness to start doing, okay, what do we need to do to take care, to keep ourselves and the people we care about safe, to stay connected to our deepest values. And amazingly, when we do those things, we feel often a sense of warmth and a sense of joy, even if the suffering doesn't go away, because ultimately, as human beings, we need to be in relationship with each other, and we need to know we're not alone. And when we recognize that, either by going to help someone or receiving help from someone, or recognizing that we're in this together, we sense that like our vagal nerve, which is running from our brain down all the way through our body, literally begins to like wake up. And that's that warm feeling inside of your heart that you're like, right? Like, and when when our vagal nerve starts getting stronger, like practicing through that, here's the hard, here's the love, it has a whole host of physiological benefits for us. Our heart rate variability, which is linked to inflammation levels, heart disease, all these things, that improves. Our immune system, our like immune response goes up, like it improves, and our stress levels begin to drop. And so this process, our body rewards us really, really, really deeply for having compassion, because being alive is hard. And a lot of times, like, compassion is not the only response to suffering. We can be angry, we can go on the attack, we can blame ourselves, we can blame someone else. And so those are also possibilities. But when we respond with compassion, we are the first recipients of that benefit. Our bodies are. We become healthier, we become more resilient, we become more courageous, we become more capable. And so that's one of the really, really amazing things. And I'll stop sharing my screen for just a minute. And I'll just come to sort of point this out, and then we'll do an exercise, which is, if you think about this, it really makes sense, because as humans, we are born really, really vulnerable, right? Like, we are born way before we're ready to live on our own. We've got these huge heads that have to somehow get outside of our moms before they're too big to get outside. And so we're born only 9 months into our development. And then we require care for years before we're able to care for ourselves. And so this instinct to take care of the vulnerable, we are wired for that because we need to take care of our young. We need to take, and we also are wired, because we're human, to look for care. Like, as infants and as children, we look for, who are the people who are going to take care of me? Who is going to keep me safe? Who is going to be my friend, right? Those are all human instincts. And so that instinct to care and to be taken care of is why we survive as individuals. It's also why we survive as families. It's why we survive as communities. It's why we survive as a species. Like, we are literally wired and born to be good to each other. And it's only one of many parts of being human, but it is as much a part of us as needing to eat, needing to drink, needing to sleep. And so recognizing that this is an instinct, sort of like an innate capacity, one of the things that we can choose to do is to start practicing, is to start noticing, like developing our capacity to be aware, noticing when we feel those feelings of connection and care, and noticing them and naming them and claiming them, looking for opportunities where we recognize our common humanity, that we're all in this together. We might not agree with how to do it, but if we can see each other's humanity, we're much more likely to have conversations that are helpful, rather than conversations that cause more suffering. So I'm going to read a quote that I think really captures this. So on an individual level, like, the fact that this is how we are wired, us as human beings, like, we totally rearranged our social structures, all these things for our mutual well-being and our mutual care. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, so that's like on an individual sort of level, but this is also like, it applies to society and it applies to cultures. And I'm going to read a quote that's from Margaret Mead, but I invite you to sort of put this in the context of the pandemic and think about the ways that you may have done this same thing in a different way during a pandemic, or that you may have seen other people doing it. And then we're going to do like a 5-minute thought reflection. I'll give you guys some time to actually, if you have a pen handy or your computer or tablet, to just journal. If you don't, you can just think about it. But this is Margaret Mead, or it's a quote about her that came out in an article at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'll share this in the resources. Quote, "Years ago, anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first signs of civilization and culture. The student expected Mead to talk about fish hooks, or clay pots or grinding stones. Because we're librarians, you could think language, right? Books. So, but no, Mead said that the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur that had been broken and then healed. So the femur is our long thigh bone, like the bone that goes from our hip down to our knee. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, get to a river for a drink, or hunt for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur that has healed is evidence that someone has taken time to stay with the one who fell, has bound up the wound, has carried the person to safety, and has tended the person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts. So I invite you, you can either close your eyes for this and keep them open. Some people, like when they're doing reflection, they like to do it more like a meditation. Other people like to do it just sort of as a thought process. There's no right way to do this. But I invite you to just sort of take a minute, just sort of settle yourself wherever you're at, find a comfortable seat. Maybe just taking a deep breath, inhale through the nose, exhaling through the mouth, sort of just shaking it out a little bit. And I invite you to, in your mind's eye, go back to the beginning of 2020. So it's a really long time ago. You might not remember exactly what was going on, but where you were in your life, personally and professionally, what it looked like before the pandemic sort of really required us to start shifting things in our lives. See if you can remember the first days as the news was coming in, perhaps if you have children learning that they weren't going to be going to school, or if you had kids in college that came home for spring break and weren't going back to spring break. Perhaps when you learned that the library would be closing and you would need to rethink what that looked like. Think about the things you didn't know. I know for many of us, it was hard to find toilet paper and we wondered, are we ever going to have toilet paper again? Now we don't worry about toilet paper, but there was a toilet paper worrying part of our lives. I remember going to the store and not being able to find a lemon for about a week and a half and thinking, will I ever be able to have lemons again? Or how long will it be till I get a lemon? And then, I got lemons just fine. But think about what you didn't know then and that what now feels familiar. What was something that felt impossible that now you don't even think about? I remember taking an old tablecloth and cutting it to make my first masks for me and my family because there was no cloth anywhere to be found. And I don't sew. So there I was trying to sew masks. And now that's not a problem. But as you think about that, you can kind of just travel through your mind through that first spring, last summer, into the fall and winter, when we learned that there were vaccinations that might work, whatever your feelings are about that, one way or the other. How you have felt during the spring and summer, and now as we come into another stage of the pandemic, where once again, we don't really know what's next. As kids go back to school and colleges open up, there's so much joy, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. And so just sort of holding that whole thing in your mind, see if you can now reflect on how have you made it to this point? How did you get through those impossible points? Was there a person, a colleague, a partner, somebody you don't know? What has helped you make it through these past 18 months? You might even reflect on your own resourcefulness. What have you learned about what you need? What do you still not know about what you need, or you still haven't figured out how to take care of? But what has helped you through these challenges, and who have you helped? Going back to that image of Margaret Mead's broken femur, who have you stayed with and who has stayed with you to make it this far? And is there anything that you've learned about yourself? Any new strengths that you've discovered? And now here in August 2021, almost September, what do you need now? What would be helpful? What would be the equivalent of the person who stays with you? And is that something you can do for yourself or something that you can ask for from someone who cares for you? And how might you need to shift the way that you've been carrying the weight of this time? Like knowing that it might not be over. Like sometimes we pace ourselves for like a 5K and we're like, oh, it's a 10K. No, it's a marathon. Oh, it's an ultra marathon. It's not an ultra marathon, it's an ultra Ironman, right? Like what do you need to do to change, to take care of yourself? And what helps you keep going? What do you love? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What, when you think, I can't do this anymore, do you think of, do you find inside yourself that helps you keep going? Can you celebrate everything that you and those around you have already done and figured out? And can you also hold the sorrow of all the things that we've lost? Can you hold both of those things at once? Both that awareness and that sense of care and that willingness to show up. And when you hold those two things, what does it feel like? What does that feel like in your heart, in your mind, in your body? When you don't turn away from the hard, but you also don't turn away from the good and the courage and the love. So I'm going to give you just 2 minutes to kind of hold on to those questions. You can take that time to journal if you'd like, or you can just go get a drink, do whatever feels like love to you at this moment. But yeah, I'll just go ahead and mute myself and give you 2 minutes. Another 20 minutes, 20 seconds or so to jot down any thoughts you might want to come down back to. We'll just take another 20 seconds. So, if we were together in a room or, I thought about maybe doing breakout rooms, but because this is being recorded and I know that different people are in different situations, it's not always easy to do a breakout room. But this is a great time to just, if you have a chance later to have a conversation with someone about this and ask them those same questions and talk about it. Oh my goodness, I think you'll be surprised at what a powerful experience it can be to share this and to hear somebody else talk about it. Um, Even just thinking about it makes me feel that way. And just reading some people have put their name somewhere they're located in the chat. And I was looking at that during the 2 minutes. I'm just, oh my gosh, this is so great, right? Like, just thank you for being here and just to recognize that none of us are alone in this. Like, we're doing this together. We don't know the details of each other's lives, but we're here because something matters to us and because that's a powerful, powerful thing to be in community. So this practice of remembering is a really, really, really powerful tool when we're in the face of challenging things. Remembering how you've gotten through hard things in the past and is a powerful way to resource yourself to do hard things in the future. As librarians, I'm sure, and I don't know, but I'm sure many of you love stories. And that's part of the brilliance of stories, right? Is that they teach us we can do hard things as human beings. And in fact, this is where we get the most meaning in our lives. And there's a beautiful, beautiful quote. This is from J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. It's also in the movies, but this is Samwise. Some of you may know the story, some of you may not. But there are two characters who are on a really difficult journey. I'll leave it at that. It's like almost 1,000 pages, so it's not really doing it justice at all. But this is a quote. Samwise is helping his friend Frodo do something really difficult. And he says, quote, "It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something, that there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for." So we are in the middle of writing our own stories, and this capacity for us to really claim and to hold on to the things that we love and that have value to us, either through remembering how we've done it in the past, telling stories about why we're doing it now, and connecting to the good and the people we love, are powerful, powerful ways of moving forward with compassion, moving forward in our lives. I'm going to share my screen again. And if you have questions or thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. So this is something that one of my teacher trainers gave us that I think is a really helpful thing to keep in mind during this time, that there's this thing like a comfort zone, right? For all of us, that might be like sitting on your couch with your favorite book. It might be camping. It might be having a good cup of coffee with your cat on your lap. It might be whatever, right? But the place where you just feel, and it's the place we like all just want to like spend a lot of time in. The thing about the comfort zone is when we're in that place, we don't grow a lot, because actually as human beings, we grow and we develop and we get new skills by being faced with challenges. And so that's this growth zone right here. And this is where life happens. And this is where we grow. It's where we learn things. It's where we, but we need to come back to this comfort zone enough that we have the resources to be in this growth zone. But when we get pushed too far, too fast, or we've been asked to do hard things for too long, or we don't have the resources to do what we're being asked to do, we go into overwhelm. And that's not because we're failing. It's just because like you can't drive a car without gas in it. You can't like you can't make things go farther than they can go. When you're in overwhelm, which a lot of us are right now, not all the time, but not infrequently, the invitation is to find some time, some way to tap back into your comfort zone. When we go into overwhelm, the way we sort of realign ourselves, the way we get back to a better place so that we can be there for the things that matter to us, the people who matter to us, is to take care of ourselves. And, right now that probably for most of us doesn't mean like, going to a spa for a week. But we don't need that. Our body responds to micro moments of connection, micro moments of comfort. We don't need a Thanksgiving of taking care of. We can do like a quick drink of water care. And that helps us go from overwhelm back into the growth zone or back into what feels manageable. And so an example of that could be just like taking a deep breath, going for a walk around the block, saying, asking a colleague to cover for you one afternoon so that you can do something that feels kind to yourself, covering for a colleague when they need that time, right? But looking out for yourself and looking out for others, because we are like in for the long haul on this and we don't know how it will go. So when you feel yourself getting into that overwhelm zone, you feel that suffering, how can you bring your care online? Or if you see someone you care for or you care about or a colleague in overwhelm, how can you help them come back to a place of like more stability, and sort of provide support for them? And once again, it doesn't have to be something huge. It can just be something simple. And so being aware, like, oh, that overwhelm for some people will look like freaking out. Overwhelm for other people will look like hating everybody in the world. Overwhelm for some people will be going numb, right? Overwhelm can look really different for each of us, but chances are all of us kind of have a sense at this point in our lives of what our unique flavors of overwhelm are. And when you're in overwhelm, the invitation is to practice self-compassion. And I'm going to go, I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but I just want to share this with you. So Kristin Neff is the pioneer of self-compassion. And there's just tons and tons and tons of research out there around self-compassion right now, like peer-reviewed, amazing research that show that self-compassion is actually a bigger predictor of what's called post-traumatic growth, which is like someone goes through something really hard, but they come out stronger, more sure of who they are, more, like resilient, as compared to post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress or complicated stress. And what the research shows is they, like, for example, in one study, they looked at combat veterans and that levels of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, were more closely correlated, negatively correlated to self-compassion than level of exposure to trauma. So if somebody had high levels of self-compassion, they could be exposed to something really difficult, and they were more likely to go into sort of a post-traumatic growth and healing than somebody who's exposed to just a little bit of trauma but had very little self-compassion. So self-compassion, that ability to know I'm in overwhelm, I'm having a difficult time, I need to take care of myself, I'm worthy of care, is more predictive of health and resilience and well-being than what kind of things you've had to do. And that's, the research has supported that over and over again in the last, like that they've done in the last 20 years. But Kristin Neff, the pioneer, defines 3 parts of self-compassion. The first is mindful awareness, right? Just learning to pay attention to our own moment-to-moment experiences without judging them. So there's that awareness again, right? Like I'm yelling at my kids. I don't really want to yell at my kids. I'm having a hard time, right? I like, whatever, like you're just learning to pay attention to like what's going on for me right now. What am I feeling right now? And then when you're aware of it, to bring kindness, not to be like, oh, I'm such a bad parent for yelling, but to be like, oh, kids, I need a timeout. Like call a friend, get a parent, like a partner, let your kids watch something for a while, right? Like, so that's just one example. But this sense of like, this is part of being human. I'm in overwhelm. Like I am beyond what I can do. And that's part of being human. That doesn't make me a bad person. This is part of the human experience. But oh, I'm really sorry. It's really hard to raise a family during a pandemic. It's really hard being a librarian during a pandemic. It's really hard, fill in the blank. So it's just that sense of gentleness, because when we are kind to ourselves, our bodies register it as if somebody else was being kind to us. When we beat ourselves up or we shame ourselves, our bodies respond the same way we would as if we were a kindergartner with a teacher who yells at the kids, right? So this is some place that we can just practice just saying, oh, I'm really tired. And just even saying that, just noticing that immediately brings down the stress levels and starts bringing on this sense of well-being and care. The third part of self-compassion, and this is true for all compassion practices, is connecting to our common humanity. When we recognize, like, just like me, I'm just like other people. I'm not the only other person who's going through this experience. I'm not the only person in the world who's struggling with this. This is part of the human experience, right? Like, and so those three elements of mindful awareness, self-kindness, and common humanity don't have to take a lot of time. But the minute we begin, like as soon as we start giving ourselves those gifts, if we're in that overwhelm zone, our body experiences all three of these as the comfort zone. Because when we're aware, when we bring awareness to our body experiences it as care. When we're kind to ourselves, our body experiences it as, once again, that sense of comfort, of care. When we recognize our common humanity, that sense of not being alone is a sense of care, because we, like, that is ultimately one of our biggest needs as human beings, is to not be alone. And so, going back to those circles, if you're here, even just being aware, oh, I'm in overwhelm. Oh, this is really hard. It's okay. It's not, like, what do I need? This is part of being human. Those things feel like comfort to your heart and your body and mind. And those will bring you back to this more balanced and this more balanced state of being. There's one of the big researchers around compassion, contemporary researchers, is a woman named Tanya Singer, and one of her colleagues, Olga Plamecki, and they're in Germany, she was at the Max Planck Institute. And she's really like one of the big researchers looking at the difference between empathy and compassion, because lots of times we use these terms interchangeably, and they sometimes mean the same thing to different people and different things. But in the science, empathy and compassion are actually two different things. They actually look different in our bodies. So if somebody is just having empathic, so you can have empathic concern, which is more like compassion. You can see that here. But just empathy, which is our ability as a human being to feel what other people are going through, right? Like you see someone slam their finger in the door, you go, oh! You see a baby and you go, you see people fall in love and you go, ah, right? Like all those things, we're wired as human beings to catch other people's emotional states. And that's essential to our survival. And that's the first step in compassion. That's part of that awareness that I spoke about. But if we get stuck just in feeling other people's stuff or just in feeling our stuff, we begin to burn out and we go into, into what's called empathetic distress, which is another name for that sense of overwhelm. And the research shows that when we are in that place of empathetic distress, it ends up being all about us, right? Because we're on fire. So like we need to put out the fire inside of ourselves, or we're protecting ourselves. So we say, I don't care about those people. They're the losers who feel differently about this than I do. Like, we start having negative feelings, our stress levels go up, and it actually leads to poor health and burnout and just a need to withdraw, like to say, I can't do this any longer. And sometimes we go into empathetic distress, or we go into compassion collapse or compassion fatigue, because we don't have the resources to do what we're being asked to do. And we can see this with a lot of the healthcare workers around the world. They're being asked to do things that are physically impossible for a human being to do. Like they're just being asked to run a marathon that never ends. And so sometimes we'll go into that distress because simply as a human being, we are mortal and we are limited and we can only give so much before we begin breaking down. And if we don't have circles of support around us, we will collapse. So that can happen also. So it's not like, oh, if you've got compassion, you'll never get exhausted. Um, the thing that they found though is that here's this empathy, and there's this two different ways that it shows up in our body when it's like suffering goes on for a long time. One, it can become this distress. The other is that it can become compassion, which, as I mentioned, is rejuvenating. Like compassion actually neurologically makes us younger. It gives us more energy. Like in terms of dopamine levels, they go up, or capacity to do hard things, endorphins come up. Like our body really puts us in a place where we are strong and courageous. This little part right here, the difference is care, is tapping into what we love and what we value, which goes back to that idea that compassion is that empathy and that willingness to do something and that sense of care. So when suffering moves through love, it becomes compassion. Or when love moves through suffering, it becomes compassion. And love can be like, the way we love a partner, or we love a pet, or we love a child or a mentor. Or it can be love like, I just care. Like it doesn't have to be, big, huge love. And there's a woman who, and I will send a link to her book, make a note, Barbara Fredrickson, who's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she does a research around love. And it's really powerful because love is ultimately just this micro moment of connection with another human being. That's how our body experiences it. But we have noticed that suffering, we turn to care, then we begin this process of compassion, of empathic concern, of sympathy, is how Tanya Singer names them. And then what that shows up in our body as is being concerned for others and our own well-being, but we turn outward. We have positive feelings. We feel brave. We feel joy, even in the middle of suffering. We become healthier, and we experience what they call pro-social motivation, which means we want to be nice to people. That's like all that really pro-social motivation means. So that the hinge point on that is just saying, what matters to me here, and what do I love, and what do I care about? Which brings me, let me see the time, a couple of minutes, and then I'll wrap up, to these three questions. And I'm going to give you guys just, well, let me think. Yeah, I'll give you 3 minutes to just look at these questions and to choose one of them and to reflect on it. What personal quality or strength do you appreciate about yourself? What activity, role, or relationship brings you meaning, satisfaction, or joy? What mission, purpose, or community do you serve? So just taking one of those questions, and for the next 3 minutes, just either thinking about it if you would like to, or then literally just sort of freestyle, free thought, writing about one of these questions. So just maybe taking a couple more seconds to wrap up any thoughts. I will send this PowerPoint out, so you'll have these questions if you want to keep journaling on them. There's some really interesting research, and I'll send you the quote from this study, but I think this is also will probably feel really intuitive, which is, but the research shows that writing about our personal values, writing about the things we love, the things that are important to us, strengthens us. It creates resilience against us, it courage in the face of threat. And what they found, what they have found sort of to be the thread behind it is it's because when we write about our values, it connects us to those things that transcend us as individuals. It wraps us into this bigger arc of a story of which we are a central part, but we are only part. So it helps us recognize that even if the end of the story as we thought it was going to happen is here, it's not the end of the story. And when we recognize that, we connect into that bigger sense of common humanity, the whole human experience. And I just want to end with one thought, and then I'll read a poem, which is, I'll stop sharing my screen. If you are alive right now, which you are descended from somebody who survived a pandemic previously, right? You are descended from someone who survived war. You are descended from someone who survived famine. You are descended from someone who survived broken legs, broken marriages, broken homes, broken communities, natural disaster. Like, you have this knowing in you. Nobody's ever had to do what we've had to do. Like, no one's done a pandemic in such an interconnected world. And there's a lot of complexities to our lives that no one's ever had to do before. But if we are alive, we literally are the children of the children of the children of the people who found the resources and the love to keep living and to keep loving in the face of the impossible. And there's a lot of profound research, or great research, around the epigenetics of trauma. But there's also the epigenetics of resilience and of courage and of strength. And whatever you choose to do from this point in your life moving on, you will have been part of the story of how humanity survived this particular pandemic. And that's a really powerful thing to remember, is that one, you have the knowing literally wired in you of how to do hard things with love, and that you are part of that story right now. The last thing I want to just share with you is this idea that what we do doesn't have to be big. Small things really matter. And there's a poem by a contemporary poet named Danusha Lemeris, who's in California, called Small Kindnesses. And so I'll end with this, and then if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them and hang out. She writes, I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say bless you when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. But what if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope some of this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You're also welcome to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and you happy to do that. And I will send out some resources. There's just great, great stuff out there. There's great books, there's great videos, there's great courses. Um, so thank you so much. Okay,
Laura,
over to you. Uh-huh.
I wanted to say thank you. I appreciate everything. I think that in terms of the questions, I think you're putting your contact information in there. I have mine in there. We have ours as well. Feel free to follow up, to reach out. But I think that it's a pretty perfect way to end in just letting what you said resonate for the rest of the day. So with that, I would say that that's it for today's session. I love what you covered: vagal nerves, components of compassion, broken femurs, growth in comfort zones. I took so much out of this and I'm so appreciative. We really appreciate everybody who could come, and a super, super special thank you to Laura for making all of this possible. Until next time, everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Well, thank you, Isaac.
Of course.